B'siyata d'shmai, we're going to learn Moed Katan Daf Chav Zayin. We're going to start 5 lines from the bottom of Daf Chav Vav Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Ve'ein mavrin elo al mitois zukufois. This takes us back to the final statement of the Mishnah at the end of Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis. The Mishnah said, Ein mavrin, one does not serve the mourner's meal, elo al mitos kufois, the people who are coming to console him, they should be sitting on reclining on regular beds in the right position, not overturned beds, as with the mourners, the halacha is they have to sit on, or they turn over their beds. Says the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanon, if somebody goes to the home, to a mourner's home, the home where people are mourning, and he's there whilst they are serving the mourners the meal, if it's somebody who feels very close to the person mourning, then yavruhu al mitois kfuyos. Then this guest, this visitor, is allowed to be sitting on turned over beds. Ve'im lav, but if not, then yavruhu al mitois zukufos. Then the visitor, the person who's coming to be menachim, he should be on mitois kufos, on upright beds. Says the Gemara, Rava Isra bei Milsa, something unfortunate happened to Rava, one of his close relatives passed away. Ola legabei Abba bar Marta. Abba bar Marta went to visit him. Dehu Abba bar Menyumi. Abba bar Marta is Abba bar Menyumi. And Rava Zokif. Rava, he straightened out the bed for the person coming to be menachem him, for Abba bar Marta. Abba bar Marta, coffee. But Abba bar Marta, he turned the bed back over onto its wrong side, turned it over. Omar. So Rava said to Abba bar Marta, Kama lesbe daita lahai tzurva mirabonon. It's interesting where he gets his ideas from. What makes him think he's so close to me that it's appropriate that he should be sitting on a turned over bed whilst in this position? Says the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanon. If somebody is going from place to place, that means he was traveling around on business and suddenly he hears that one of his relatives passed away. If he can restrict his business transactions somewhat, then he should do that. If he's not able to restrict them, because if he does, it's going to be a dava ovid, he's going to lose money, then he should only do business in conjunction with others, he shouldn't do the transactions on his own. From what point is the halacha that one turns over the beds? Says the Gemara, from when the deceased leaves the door of the home, to go to be buried, from that point, all the beds in the home get turned over. Tivi Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua says, when the casket, when the coffin gets sealed, gets finally closed, from that point, the halachas of Kfiyas HaMitah, turning the beds over, apply. Ma'isa, there was an incident, Shameis Rabban Gamliel Azokin, Rabban Gamliel the elder passed away. As soon as his body was removed from the house, Rabbi Eliezer told the people in the home, turn your beds over. When they sealed the coffin, now Rabbi Yeshua told them, now it's time to turn the beds over. So they said to Rabbi Yeshua, when Rabbi Eliezer, who was an elder, he already told us that we should turn our beds over as soon as the body was removed from the house. Says the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanon. At what point on Erev Shabbos, because on Shabbos itself, there's no restrictions of mourning, so at what point on Erev Shabbos do they turn the beds back over? They straighten out the beds. Says the Gemara, Mina mincha ulamailo, from the time of mincha. Exactly what mincha is a discussion, but from the time of mincha is when the beds are turned back. Omar Rabbi Bar Huna, Afal Pikein, nonetheless, Eino Yeshiv Eleh, he should not sit on the upright beds until it's actually Shabbos, which is from when it's dark. Ulemoitze Shabbos, and on Moitze Shabbos, Afal Pisha Ein Lo Leishiv Eleh Yom Echad, even though Sunday is going to be the last day of Shiva, in the event that Sunday is the last day of Shiva, and there's only one day left of Shiva, and even that day it's only a partial day miktas yom kekuloi. Nonetheless, chayzer v'koifa, he has to turn the beds back over onto their edge, onto the upside down, for to conform with the halachas of Avelus. Says the Gemara Ton Rabbanon, hakoifa mitosoi, when somebody who's required to turn his bed over, loy mitosoi belvatu koifa, not only his own bed he turns over, elo kol mitis yeshli b'seich beisoi hu koifa, he turns over all the beds in the home. Even if he's got 10 beds in 10 different places in the house, koifa is kulon, all his beds get turned over. Even if there were 5 brothers or meis echod and one of them passed away, kulon koifin, even though each brother is going to be sleeping in their own respective homes, the beds in the homes of those in mourning have to be turned over. It's not to do with the home where the deceased lived or where the deceased passed away, it's to do with the people in mourning, that they have to turn their beds over. If they had a bed that was not designated to be slept on, rather just to hold utensils, one does not have to turn it over. Dargash, we'll soon see what a dargash is, but a dargash, it does not need to be turned over. You can leave it in its upright position. Dargash, whatever this dargash is, matir es karbitov, he unties the loops, and we'll see. But there was always, how's a bed made? There's 4 feet with 4 posts going from one foot to the next, 2 long ones, 2 short ones, and then there were different ways. We'll soon see, but there were different ways of suspending what we would call today a mattress. But whatever they would sleep on was either there were ropes that were crisscrossed along the from one side to the next. That means there was the ropes were put around the poles on each side and stretched from the width and the length, and then they could sleep on top of it. And that there was, we'll soon see, but there's another type of bed which is like a leather type of bed, and that was hung on loops. But either way, this dargash matir es karvitov, one unties the loops, v'hu neifel me'elov, and then the part where one would sleep on automatically drops. Asks the Gemara, my dargash, what's this dargash that according to the Tanakama one doesn't need to turn it over, and according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel one unties its loops? Omar Ula said it's arosa de gado. It's a bed that was left empty, that was never used. It was like the word gado is from a lashon of mazel, for good fortune, and it seems that there was a custom to keep a bed in the home totally unused, which was some sign for a good mazel, and that bed did not need to be turned over. According to Tanakama and according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, they would untie the loops. Omale Rava. So Rava now asked against Ula, Elo me'ato gabi melech. Did we not learn regarding the mourner's meal that was served to a king? Titnan, that we learnt in a Mishnah. Kol ha'om mesubin al oretz. All the people, they reclined on the ground, on the earth. V'hu meisev ala dargash. And the king would recline on the dargash. Mi'ikumidi, is it makes sense that something that till that point on, lo yisivna, if you said, you Ula said it's arasot de God, it was a bed that was never used. Does it make sense that until this king was in mourning, till this person passed away, the king would never sleep on this bed? And v'hashta, and now that he's in mourning, he sits on this bed, it's not probable. Maskif lo Rav Ashi. And now the Rav Ashi is asking a question against Rabbi. Rabbi asked, how can you Ula say that a dargash is an unused bed? And Rabbi asked from a Mishnah that says the king sits on a dargash. Rav Ashi is now asking against Rabbi. My Kashi, what's your question? Midi dehava achila or shtia. It's no difference to eating and drinking of anyone in mourning. De'atu idna, that till the relative passed away, lo yachilne v'lo yashkine. Other people don't come and feed them, give them to eat, give them to drink. Hashta, and now that they're in mourning, then people come and give them to eat and give them to drink. So the same might be true with the king. Till the relative passes away, the king wouldn't sit on that bed, and now he would sit on that bed. What's so difficult to understand? Eloi kashya ha kashya. Rav Ashi says, you want to have a question against Ula, who says that this dargash is the bed that was never used. We'll have a different kasha Titnan, as we learned in a brisa. Dargash eine tzarech lechapoisei. One does not need to turn the dargash bed upside down in a home of mourning. He just stands it up. Vi arsa degoda. If you're going to say that it's the bed of an unused bed, why would he not have to turn it upside down? Hotnan, did we not learn that that somebody who's in mourning and is required to turn over his bed, not only his bed he has to turn over, he has to turn over all the beds in his house. Why should this one be any different? Says the Gemara, Umay Kashya, that's also not a question against Ula. Midi dehava amita hamiyuchedes lekelim. Did we not learn the Tanya im hoisa mita hamiyuchedes lekelim? If you have a bed that's designated not to sleep on, but just to put utensils on, you don't need to turn it over. So this bed, which is a dargash, even though it's an arasod degada, which is this bed which it's just for good luck, nobody sleeps on it, and it does not need to be turned over, and is not included in the requirement for all the beds to have to be turned over. Eloi kashya ho kashya. If already you want to ask a question, the following is the question. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel argued and said that dargash matir karbitov, that in the case of the dargash bed, then you just untie the loops, and it falls. If this dargash is this bed, which is an unused bed, my karbitin isle, it's just a normal bed that happens not to be used to sleep on. It's just there for good luck, for good fortune, but it's not a different type of bed. So why would Reb Shimon ben Gamliel respond by saying that undo the loops and it will fall on its own? A regular bed is not made with loops at all. It's this whole thing of loops, and if you open the loops, then the bed will fall down on its own. The leather, the part of the bed where one sleeps on, will fall. That's not a regular bed. Ki asa Ravin Omar le'ahumi Rabbanon. When Ravin came, one of the Chachamim said to him that Rav Tachlifa bar Marova Shmei, it was Rav Tachlifa bar Marova was his name, to have a shchiach b'shuka de Gildoi. He was in the marketplace of the leather makers, and he said, not like Ula, he said, my dargash, you know what a dargash is? Arsa de tzila. A leather type of bed. A bed where the area that was slept on was made of leather, and that is this bed called the dargash bed, which we're discussing here. It's Menami Omer of Yirmiyah, dargash. What is the dargash? Is sirugoi mitoichoi. The bindings, what holds it together, is mitoichoi, is from within the wooden frame going around the bed. That mita, however, regular mita, siruga al gaba, the bindings are wrapped over and around the wood and not going through the wood. Omer of Yaakov Ba'acha, Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Halacha Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. We saw before there was a machlokes regarding this dargash bed. The Tanakama says that ein tzarich lechapoisa, you don't need to turn it over on its side. Elo zoikfa, you turn it, you stand it upright. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says that you untie the loops. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said that halacha is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Itmanami Omer of Yaakov bar Acha Omer of Asi. Similarly, mitar bed shenakliteo yotzin, that there are the double posts that protrude at the ends of the bed. They had these posts going up, and then a pole going between the two posts, and they would drape a sheet over it to protect the people sleeping in it from the insects. And such a type of bed that you cannot turn upside down because there's two poles sticking up in the middle of it. It can't be upside down. Zoikfa v'dayo. Then it's enough if you just stand it up, like we're talking about this dargash bed. Just stand it up on its side. You don't need to turn it upside down. V'dayo, and that's enough. Continues the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon. Yashon al gabi kisei. If somebody sleeps on a chair, somebody in mourning doesn't turn his bed over, he sleeps on a chair. Al gabi udaina gedola, or on a large mortar. Al gabi karka, or he sleeps on the floor. Lo yotzu yidei chayvasei, and we've actually seen this already on Daf Chof Aleph. He hasn't fulfilled his requirement of turning the beds upside down. Rabbi Yechon explained, because there's halacha, you have to turn your beds over, and just sleeping in an uncomfortable position is not good enough. You actually have to turn the beds over. Tanu Rabbanon, mechabdim, one sweeps, umarbitzim, one sprinkles water, bebeis ha'ovel, in the home of mourning, umadichin ka'oris, and one rinses plates, v'koisos, cups, v'tzlochios, and jars, v'kitoinios, and bottles, bebeis ha'ovel, in the home of mourning. Ve'ein mevi'in as a mugmar, one doesn't bring some types of scents, some incense, v'sabsomim or spices, lebeisa oval, to the home of an oval. Asks the Gemara, Eini, is that true? V'atani bar kapara, did bar kapara not teach us, ein mevorchin, that one doesn't make a bracha for the besomim, for the scent of lo yala mugmar v'lo yala besomim, for the incense and the spices beveisa oval in the oval's home? Can we not deduce from that brisa that beruchu deloi mevorchinon, that we don't make a bracha over them, ha asuye maisa, but we are allowed to bring them, contrary to what we said that you're not allowed to, that ein mevi'in, we do not even bring them? Says the Gemara, lo kashi, it's not a contradiction. Ha bebeis ha'ovel, ha bebeis ha'menachmin. In the room where the people in mourning are positioned all the time during the week, there one doesn't bring it at all. But in the other room, the beis ha'menachmin, if that's the place where the people who are coming to console the people mourning are sitting, and the mourners just come in to be greeted by those people, not to be greeted, but to be consoled by the people who have come to menachem them, and it's just that other room over there, one's allowed to bring this besomim, but one doesn't make a bracha there. Continues the Mishnah, Ein meilichin lebeisa oval, we do not deliver food to the home of we're talking here about the Sudas Havra, the mourner's meal, we do not bring it to the home of the people mourning, loy betavla, not on a tray, v'loy be'askutla, not in a large bowl, v'loy bekinoin, and not in a large basket, ela besalim, rather just in a regular plain basket. Ve'inoim birchas avelim, one doesn't say the bracha of the avelim, those in mourning, b'moed, on chol hamoed, aval imdim b'shura, but on chol hamoed, after the burial, they do stand in rows for the people in mourning to go between them, u'menachmin, and we console them. U'poitrin es harabim, and then we dismiss the people, they go home, because it's chol hamoed. Ein manichin es hamita b'rechoiv, on chol hamoed, one does not place the beer in the bed where the corpse is, on the street, on chol hamoed, shlei lehagdil es hahisped, in order not to encourage people to eulogize something which is not done on chol hamoed. V'lo shel noshim la'olam, and the beer carrying a deceased woman, is never put out into the public on the street, in the rechoiv, mipnei hakovod, because it's not dignified for her. And that is because very often a woman, when she passes away, there's certain ziva that comes from her, it's not dignified. Says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanon, Barishayna hayu moilichin beveisa oval. At first, they used to bring to the food to the homes of people in mourning, then as follows. Ashirim, the rich people, they would bring the foods bekalosis shel kesef v'shel zav, in baskets of silver and gold. Vaniyim, but the poor people, just besali netzorim shel arova klufa, just with baskets made of peeled willow twigs. The poor people would be embarrassed because it's so clear that you're bringing us the food in a basket of willow twigs, whereas the rich people are getting their food in very expensive baskets. And hiskinu, therefore they instated, sheyu hakil mevi'in, that they all bring besali netzorim shlarava klufa, that the food was always brought in these baskets of peeled willow twigs. In the honor and dignity of the poor people. Tonu Rabbanon, at first they would pour the drinks, they would bring the drinks in the home of the people mourning. Ashirim, the rich people, b'schuchis levana, with white glass. Va'aniyim, b'schuchis tzvua, and the poor people, it was brought to them with less quality colored glass. V'hoyanim is baishim, again the poor people would be embarrassed. Hiskinu shiu hakil mashkin b'schuchis tzvua, so they instated that in any home of mourning, the drink is brought in the not clear and coloured glass. Out of respect and honour and dignity for the poor people. At first, they would reveal the face of the deceased rich people, but the faces of the poor people would be covered, because their faces were blackened, their faces were blackened because of famine, because of the lack of food that they had. The poor people would be embarrassed, and therefore iskinu, they instated, and from then on, they covered the faces of all the deceased. But At first, they would on what type of bed would they take out the deceased person? Ashirim, the rich people, bedargash, on a dargash bed, v'aniyim, and the poor people, beklicha, which is a beer. V'hoyu aniyim mizbaishim, again the poor people would be embarrassed. Hiskinu shiu hakil moitziin bechlicha, and therefore they instated that all dead people were taken out on a beer. Out of dignity to give respect to the poor people. But at first they would put the incense tachas choyle me'ayim mesim underneath those people who suffered and died, or when they died they had some issues with their intestines, in order that the smells should take away the bad smell. And then the people who had digestive issues, who were alive, they were embarrassed, to say that the dead people who suffered from this, need to have special scents to put under them in order to control the smells. They would get embarrassed. And therefore they instated that all deceased people, one would put underneath them these incense, out of dignity and respect for those people who had these digestive disorders when they were alive. And them saying the alive people who had these disorders, they shouldn't be embarrassed. At first, any person, any woman who before she died she was a nida, then any utensils she touched that became tomei, then they would tovel those kelim, because whilst she was alive, and the nida, those kelim would become tomei. And then all the live women who were nidois would be embarrassed. And therefore, then they instated that the utensils used by any woman before she passed away would always be toveled, in order that the nidois, the women who are alive, should not be embarrassed. But at first, madbilim al gabi zovim mesim, the zovim at first, anyone who was a zov before he died, then the kelim which he touched were tomei, they would tovel all those kelim. V'hoyu zovim chayim is baishim, and those people who were zovim alive, but zovim, they would be embarrassed. Hiskinu, they instated shayu matbilin al gav hakil, that any kelim that were touched by somebody before he died would be toveled mipnei kvoidom shel zovim chayim, in order that the alive people who are zovim would not be embarrassed. But Rishona at first, the expenses for the dead people that it costs with the tachrichim, the expensive shrouds that they would have to buy, was kasher lekroiv of yesam misasai. It was harder for them, those expenses, than the actual passing of their relative. There were situations where their relatives would just leave the corpse there and run away and hope that the townspeople would take care of it because it was so expensive. Until Rabbi Gamliel came v'noag kalus reish be'atzmoi, and he dealt with himself lightly. And he made sure that v'yotza, that he himself was buried b'klei pishton, with simple linen clothes. V'nagu ha'machrov, and from then all the people afterwards, they had the custom lotzes b'klei pishton, that all the dead are buried in the simple linen clothes, in order not to make it too expensive, especially for those who couldn't afford it. Omer of Papa v'ha'idna, nowadays nog alma afilu b'tzarda barzuza, that even a coarse canvas which costs a zuz, they would bury people in it. Continues the Gemara, Ein manichin es hamita b'rechoiv. We saw in the Mishnah that one does not, on Chol HaMoed, one doesn't put the beer holding the corpse, holding the deceased person, in the rechoiv, in the public place. Omer of Papa, Ein moed b'fnei Talmud Chacham. When it comes to Talmud Chacham, then these halachas of not eulogizing do not apply. We override the restrictions of Chol HaMoed for a Chacham, V'kol sheken Chanukah Purim, and even more so on Chanukah Purim, where there's no issa to do activities. On Chol HaMoed, as we've learned, there's certain restrictions of doing activities. Chanukah Purim, that doesn't exist. So they said that on Chol HaMoed, and even more so Chanukah Purim, for a Chacham, one's allowed to eulogize him. V'hana mile befonov, but that's only in front of him when the deceased body is there. Aval shlei befonov loy, but not in front of him, one's not allowed to. Asks the Gemara, Eini, Is that true? V'har Rav Kahana softeler of Zvid min Naharda b'pum naro. Did Rav Kahana not eulogize Rav Zvid, who was in Naharda, whilst Rav Kahana was giving the hesped in Pum Naro? It wasn't in front of Rav Zvid, and it was on Chol HaMoed. Omer of Poppy, Yom Shmua Hava. It was the day that they heard the sad news of the passing of Rav Zvid, and therefore Kabafon of Domi, it's got the same type of halachas as being in front of him, and on that day they were allowed to eulogize him. Continues the Gemara, Omar Ula. Hesped, one of the ways that they would eulogize and they would give a hesped is a lave. They would bang on their hearts. T'chsiv, as it says, Al Shodayim Soiftim, that they would beat on the breasts. Tipuach Biyad, they would clap with their hands, and Kilus Beregel, and stamp with their feet. That's what they would do in lamentation, in when crying over a person that died. Tonu Rabbanon, Hamekali is somebody who stamps, Leikalis besandal, he shouldn't stamp with a sandal, Elo ben minol, only with a proper shoe, mipnei sakona, because of the danger. It could hurt his leg. It could break his foot. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, oval, somebody in mourning, kivan sheninei roisha, as soon as he's nodded his head as if to say that he's consoled, shuv ein menachmin, one does not continue to offer words of condolence. Shuv ein menachin rashoin leishav etzlei, from that point on, those who came to console him no longer sit with him. V'omer Rabbi Yochanan, another halacha said Rabbi Yochanan, hakel chayovim lamoid mipnei nosi. When a nosi comes, everybody has to stand up. Chutz mi ovel v'choyle, besides for somebody in mourning and a sick person, where it's not even an honor and a dignity for the nosi that they should stand up for him, and therefore an ovel and a choyle is not required to stand up. V'omer Rabbi Yochanan said, lakoil oimrim lahem shvu. Whenever anybody comes in and they stand up, we tell them sit down. That means they don't have permission. Till the Nasi tells them to sit down, they don't have permission to sit down. Chutz mi ovel v'choyle, besides for an ovel and a choyle, who in the first place didn't have to stand up, as we just saw. Therefore, if they do stand up, they do not need special permission to be able to, before they can sit down. Omer Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, ovel Yom Rishon Osa Lechem Mishaloi, the first day of mourning, is not allowed to eat from his own bread. Mida Omali Rachmana li Yecheskel. Since Hashem said to Yecheskel, and we've seen this pasuk a few times, it says, He onig doim meisim evel lo yisase pe'ircho chavoi sholecho unolecho tosim braglecho lo yisate al sofom v'lechem anoshim lo yisoichil. Hashem said to Yecheskel, who was in mourning, his wife had passed away, that you, in contrast to all other people in mourning, you should not be eating other people's foods. You can eat your own food. We deduce from there that any other person in mourning should not eat his own food. Rabbi Rav Yosef Michlefa Sudosayu La'adodi, Rabbi and Rav Yosef, when one of them was in mourning, the other one would bring them the food. V'omer Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Meis Ba'ir, when there's a deceased person in the town, Kol B'nei Ha'ir Asurim B'asiyas Melocha, all the people in the town are not allowed to do any work. Rav Hamnuna Ikler Doroimsa. Rav Hamnuna was visiting this place called Doroimsa. Shama Koil Shifura Deshachva, he heard the announcement of the shofar announcing that somebody had passed away. And Chaza, he saw Hanoch Inchi, there were these people to Ka'ov Davidita, that they were working in spite of the fact that there had been an announcement that there's a dead person there. Omar Lu, he said to them, Lehava Hanoch Inish B'Shamta, these people should be excommunicated, they're not allowed to be working now. And they answered back, Loi Shichva, and he asked them, Loi Shichva Ika B'Mosa, is there not a deceased person here in the city? How are you working? Omrulei, so they answered him back and said, Chaburasa Ika B'Mosa, this city is split up of groups and communities, and every community takes care of its own dead, and therefore, since the dead that is being taken care of by a different community, the only reason the people are not allowed to do work is to make sure that people who are responsible to take care for the needs of the dead person should be doing it and shouldn't just be going about their regular day's work. As soon as you've got different communities and every community takes care of their dead on their own, the other communities are allowed to work. Omar Husi said to them, Yihoch, if that's the case, Shari Lechu, I'll release the excommunication and you're okay. V'omer Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kol hamiskashe al meiso yesimidai. Somebody who grieves over the dead person too much, al meis achiru boicha. Then that will cause that there'll be another dead person, somebody else will pass away on who to cry over. There was this woman, Dehava b'shuvivusei de Rav Huna, in the neighborhood of Rav Huna. Havelo sheva boni, and she had 7 sons. Meis chad minai, one of them died. Havas kobachyo b'yiserasa olei. She cried excessively, too much over that child. Sholach lo Rav Huna. Rav Huna sent her a message and said, Lo savdiach, you shouldn't do that. Lo ashkecha bei. She didn't listen to him. Sholach lo. So he sent her another message. Itzayis, if you listen to me, mutav is good. V'iloy, and if you don't listen, tzovis zavdasa, you can prepare some provisions, which is shrouds, li'idoch meis, for another child that's going to die. Umeisu kulu, and ultimately all of them died. L'soif omar lo, the end he said to her, Teimush zavdasa l'nafsheich, prepare shrouds for yourself. Umeisa, and she died. And the pasuk says in Yirmiyah, Al tivku lemeis va'al togudu loy. B'chu b'choi lahoileich ki lo yoshuv oid v'ra'o es eretz moiladutoi. Says the Gemara, Al tivku lemeis, what do we learn from the word Al tivku lemeis? Don't cry for a dead person. Yosimidai, not too much. The next words, Va'al tonudu loy, which means that you should not shake your head over him. Yosimikashir, more than an acceptable, normal measure. Ha-ketzad, what does that mean? Shloisha yomim libchi. 3 days is appropriate to cry, not more. V'shiva lehesped, and 7 days to eulogize. Ushloishim legiot, and 30 days to refrain from pressing one's clothes. Uletispoires, and having a haircut. Mikan ve'elech, beyond that, Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says, I'atem rachmonim boy yosim imeni. Don't think that you're compassionate for him more than me. The next words in the pasuk, B'chu b'choi lahoileich, which means, cry a lot, lahoileich, to the one who's leaving. Omer Yehuda lahoileich b'loi bonim is talking about somebody who left the world without children. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi lo ozal lebe avlo. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi wouldn't go to a house of mourning elo leman ozal b'loi boni, unless he left the world without children, which was a real reason to cry. As it says in the pasuk, B'chu b'choi lahoileich, that you should cry a lot, lahoileich, to somebody who left, and as we said, it means somebody who left the world without children, ki la yoshuv oid, because he's got nothing to come, he's not going to come back. And the pasuk says, V'ro es eretz moiladutoi, he's not going to come back and see the land of his birthplace. Rav Huna Omar, Rav Huna says this, that it says in this pasuk, that what does it mean kilo yoshuv oid? He's not going to come back. It means he's not going to repent. He's not going to come back to Hashem. Who would that be? Zeh she'ovar avera, somebody who does an avera v'shonebo and repeats it. Rav Huna letamei is consistent with his own reasoning. Da'amar Rav Huna said, Kivon she'ovar odom avera, when a person does an avera v'shonebo and he repeats it, hutra loy, then it's permitted to him. Asks the Gemara, it's permitted just because you did it twice? Sol kadaitoch, can that enter your mind? The answer is no. Elo'ema nasis leikeheter. Once he's done it once and twice, in his mind it's as if it's permitted. He doesn't give it any more weight and he's not trying to avoid doing it. And that is somebody who, if he doesn't care about his aveirus, he's la yoshuv oid, he's not going to do tshuva, and that's clearly a crying matter. Oma Reb Levi, Oval shloisha yomim rishonim, the first 3 days of a person in mourning, yires atzmoi ki'ilu cherev munachas lo bein shtei reichosav, and others say it's bein shtei kseifav, but either way there's a certain danger. When a person is in mourning, the first 3 days, he should be concerned as if a sword is hanging between his shoulders, between his thighs, is hanging there threatening him. Mishloisha ad sheva, after the 3rd day till the end of the Shiva, then there's still a sword threatening him, but not just that close. Kilu menachas le'kenegdo, it's like a sword that's up facing him, but b'keren zovis, it's in the corner. Mikan ve'elech, after the Shiva, kilu everes kenegdo b'shuk, it's as if there's a sword that's walking past him in the marketplace, and that's even less of a level of danger, and that's till the end of the 12 months. After the 12 months, then everything is back to usual. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, in the next shiur, we're going to learn the next Gemara.